Could the murder of a teacher at Ravenscroft have been prevented? The question in our newsroom tonight, in the state legislature, and maybe in your living room as well.
Several mugshots. Look at all of these. They're all from the same man, Ryan Camacho, the suspect at the center of the murder case. We're going to be doing a deep dive on his criminal history and the effort to prevent tragedies in the future. A big piece of that could come down to changes at the local level.
WRAL's Eric Miller is joining us live in Raleigh tonight. Eric, the mayor and city council, they are looking into other things that could have been done.
Well, Dan, City Council has been meeting off and on all day. Those are regularly scheduled meetings, but still, what happened here on Clay Street certainly not far from the minds of many, including Mayor Janet Cowell. She called what happened here Saturday tragic and said Ryan Camacho, the suspect in this case, seems to have, in her words, fallen through the cracks. Now, Camacho's mental health has been a major theme of the many cases that he's been involved in over the years. Mayor Cowell also pointed to major investments that the city has made into various programs to try to treat and support those who have significant mental issues.
We have spent a lot of time here at the City of Raleigh. We've established this Acorns unit, which is all about trying to identify people with mental health or social services needs and get them the help that they need. We also work a lot with organizations like Oak City Cares that works with unhoused individuals. We have, Healing Transitions that works with people with addiction issues.
And Mayor Cowell says she's going to be looking to have conversations with folks at the General Assembly talking about what could be or should be done to try to prevent a tragedy like this happening in the future. We've certainly already heard some interest from people at the General Assembly. In Raleigh, Eric Miller, WRAL News.
Okay, thank you to Eric. Now, look, we got a whole lot of follow-up questions on this story. Lots of feedback from all of you at home. So please give us those emails, 7 p.m. at WRAL.com. We want to go through a few of them here tonight to help our coverage. Tim wrote, the guy fired into Wes Phillips' dwelling 10 years ago. That should have been enough to put him away, right? And Michael said, if you discharge a firearm into an occupied dwelling, you have shown yourself to be a danger to others.
And Scott wrote, how many more people have to be harmed before the system acknowledges its own role in enabling repeat offenders? To Michael and Tim, we understand what you mean. Shouldn't he have been put away? You'd think that some of Camacho's criminal history would have raised more red flags, that police, judges, and prosecutors would have done something different.
And to Scott's question, how many more people have to be harmed? It's kind of an unanswerable question. You hope the answer is zero, but unfortunately, we do see people who fall through the cracks. So tonight, let's address these things. Camacho's history in the system and what is being done to improve that system in the future.
Let's start with that central question. What stood in the way of getting Camacho committed to a mental institution? That was the question before a judge in December. Camacho was arrested in August for stealing pillows off the porch of one house and breaking windows at another. The court gave him the mental evaluation and determined he was unfit to stand trial. He didn't know what was going on. He couldn't defend himself, so the DA dropped the charges.
The DA, though, did ask the judge to commit Camacho for mental treatment, but the judge said no. You ask the question then, how can he be unfit to stand trial but fit enough to walk free? We asked a former judge.
He has a criminal record, but that isn't the test for whether or not he is involuntarily committable. And if a judge hears what the judge hears, and he stole some water bottles, he stole some pillows, he broke into a house and stole some little thing during the daytime, and no one was harmed or anything like that, no, he's not going to meet the criteria to be involuntarily committed. I can tell you that right now.
So he's got to meet a certain criteria. But what if Camacho had been committed? What if the judge made a different choice? For starters, Camacho would have been committed for at least 10 days. After that, the mental institution decides whether or not to keep him. If they decide he should stay, they revisit the decision every 90 days. That's just how it works. But Governor Josh Stein said today he thinks state lawmakers should consider some changes.
I had ideas that the legislature did not incorporate into Arena's law. I hope that they do. They are studying the involuntary commitment process, and I endorse that. We need to figure out what we can do to make that process better.
And remember, former Judge Carl Fox mentioned this, right? When a judge considers involuntary commitment, they're only looking at the charges at hand, not the suspect's whole criminal history. And Dan Camacho has a very significant criminal history.
And we've been talking about that a lot over the past couple of days because we want to better understand how we got to this point, to a Ravenscroft teacher being attacked in her own home. So I'm going to go through a good chunk of Camacho's past. So if it feels like a lot, it's because it is a lot. There's a lot to look through here. Camacho has been arrested many times over the years, mostly nonviolent crimes, with many charges being dismissed. But we do want to highlight two important stories in his criminal history. First, the story of Camacho stalking Wes Phillips and his family in Raleigh 10 years ago. Phillips took this video of Camacho standing in the rain outside of his home, at one point trying to get inside of his car. Another video shows Camacho on top of Phillips's car, smashing it with a rock. In 2018, Camacho was arrested for firing shots into Phillips's house. Camacho served 2 years in prison for that. He tried to escape during his sentence, but he failed, and then he served more time for that too. But there's something even more significant in Camacho's past, something that could have had him behind bars at the time of Zoe Welsh's death. Back in April, Camacho was charged in 2 cases out of Durham. 2 break-ins. One involved a woman inside her home, eerily similar to what we saw happen with Zoe Welsh. Camacho was charged with 4 felonies, not misdemeanors, felonies, crimes with tough penalties. A conviction of just one of those charges would have put him in jail for at least 10 months, but that didn't happen. Instead, Camacho got a plea deal. The DA's office combined all of those cases, and Camacho pleaded guilty to a single lower level charge. 2 break-ins, 4 felonies, boiled down to 1 misdemeanor charge for breaking and entering. Camacho got 120 days in jail with credit for time served, so it put him back on the street about 1 week later. And you might think that something just doesn't feel quite right about that. Or the fact that because of that plea deal, none of those felonies were part of the equation when a judge decided not to put Camacho into an institution like the DA had requested.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but it really does sound quite similar to what happened in Charlotte when a woman was stabbed to death on a train. The suspect had been in and out of jail for years. State lawmakers passed a law aimed at preventing future tragedies. They called it Arena's Law, after Irina Zarutska, the victim there. But would that law have changed anything in Camacho's case? Technically, Arena's Law actually didn't take effect until well after Camacho's crimes in Durham. But if it had been in effect, let's say, would it have made a difference? I spoke to WRAL state government reporter Will Doran. He explains why the answer is probably no, and unpacked some of the changes lawmakers are considering because of this. Will Doran, you have been busy at the state legislature today talking with lawmakers as well as Governor Stein. Governor Stein talking about Arena's Law. What does he say needs to change about that law?
So the governor's main critique with Arena's Law, and not just him, plenty of people, said that it really focuses on punishing people after they've been arrested or convicted, but not as much on preventing crime or, specifically in cases like these, getting people the mental health that they need to stop them from committing crime in the first place.
There is something in Arena's Law, though, that does apply to this case involving the Ravenscroft teacher and the suspect in this case, and that has to do with involuntary commitment. How does Arena's Law apply to that?
Yeah, that's really the big question here. You know, we've reported that DA's office here in Wake County wanted him to be involuntarily committed. It didn't happen. And Arena's Law does address that. It says, hey, we need to be stricter about that here in North Carolina. We need to have processes in place to get people into a mental hospital more frequently when they come into contact with the justice system. But the key thing is that has actually been delayed. It's not even in place right now because of funding issues, because of concerns with jails and the mental hospitals and everybody. They just had to kick the can down the road for a year. So even, you know, if it had happened, it wouldn't have been in place.
Right. You also spoke with a lot of top-ranking Republican lawmakers. What did they have to say about changes that need to happen in our system?
I talked to 2 state budget writers today, and both of them said that when they come back in the spring to write the new state budget, these issues are going to be top of mind for them. That mental health especially needs to be a top priority.
Arena's law does put in place some oversight for magistrates, but what about judges? Because in this case, this was a judge who worked on dismissing the case.
Exactly, and those are two very different things. Even though they're both part of the justice system, magistrates are just state employees, but judges are elected politicians. And so it's much harder to put oversight on judges. But a lot of people who are learning the details of this case say, hey, there needs to be some accountability here. And I talked with State Representative Aaron Paré, Republican from Wake County, who addressed that issue.
Even when the district attorney requests that this person be involuntarily committed, the judge then looks and says, well, he may not be competent to stand trial, but he's not an imminent threat to society, and we're not going to hold him. And so I think that's what the legislature needs to look at. We can zip up the law. We can require judges to make some decisions that will make our communities safer. We can be tougher on crime, but we also need to address mental health.
Now, it's unclear whether the legislature would actually be allowed to do this. Separation of powers issues obviously come into play, but it's clear that there's a lot of concern over some of these decisions that are being made every day in the court system across the state.
Well, Jordan, appreciate your reporting as always. Thank you.
Thanks.
You know, one of the things that Will and I talked about off camera is that judges get these involuntary commitment cases all the time. Plus, then you also have to consider that a lot of these mental health institutions, plus the jails, they are packed.
Absolutely. And we've been hearing that from viewers. I know a lot of you realize this at home. A viewer named Lisa wrote in and said, it is another story altogether about mental illness and institutionalization. These facilities have diminished, and our prisons sometimes become those facilities. The community needs a solution to harmful risks to our community, and Lisa is right about that. I mean, you can do all the mental evaluations that you'd like. You can make it easier to admit people, but if there is no space, if there's nowhere for them to go, there's not much of a solution.
Yeah, but this is, of course, something that we will be looking into. It's another piece of this story that we want to tell, another follow-up question that we want to answer. So please do keep those questions coming. Keep sending your emails to 7 p.m. at WRAL.com. We do read everything in the inbox, and we do our best to get you a response.
So please tell us what angles you'd like us to cover on this story or anything else happening here in our community. Tell us what is on your mind, and we will talk about it here at 7 o'clock.